It is Saturday, August 9th. Thank you so much for joining us. I don't know why it has taken so long for us to have Kent Engelke on, who's the Chief Economic Strategist for Capital Securities. Kent, welcome to the broadcast, my brother.
Hey, thank you there, Armstrong. Appreciate the invitation there.
You're the man. You know, it's funny, because this week's $42 billion 10-year Treasury auction was called very discouraging. I read your article. What specifically made it so troubling? And also with today's 30-year Treasury and the $100 billion 4-week Treasury auctions coming up, what do you expect to see and what are the market risks? Two-pronged question.
I believe this is such a loaded question. I think the biggest issue we're dealing with right now is $37 trillion worth of debt. We have Washington is not dealing with this at all. We're focused on things other than the deficit, which I believe is your biggest issue that is out there. The demand yesterday was for the Treasury auction was regarded as poor. What will it be today on your $25 billion offering? I hate to say it, I think it's going to be poor as well.
What about the tariffs? How it's impacting everything? I know at one point you've been encouraged, but do you think the president can sometimes just play his hand too far, just go too far? Do we need to rein in it? Where do you see the opportunity, and where do you see things that could be very problematic down the road?
I voted for the president all 3 times, and in many regards, I really support a lot of things that he's done. But in my view, he's starting to sound like a carnival barker. He's starting to sound like Baghdad Bob or someone from Pravada. Whoa, they're pretty, dogmatic statements, inflammatory statements to make. But yet he has to rein in his rhetoric itself. It's the tariffs itself are not producing the inflation as expected. And there's a lot of reasons behind that. But will the inflation come in down the line? We all believe that tariffs are inflationary. At this juncture, your corporations are sucking up the difference on the tariffs, your countries and your other companies in the method of production is absorbing the tariffs. But how long will that last? We can't afford to have inflationary expectations become unanchored with a $37 trillion debt. We're paying $1.2 trillion right now in interest expense. That's a lot of money. That's up from $350 billion 5 years ago. In a couple of years, it's going to be $2 trillion. How are we going to afford that? Will the tariffs be inflationary? Will they not? I am a supporter of the president, but he has to rein in his rhetoric because he's going to risk losing the power of the bully pulpit.
So let's talk about what analysts are saying about this forecast of 3 rate cuts by the end of the year, Kent, including a potential 50 basis point cut next month in September. How realistic is that in your view?
Oh, in my view, I've always believed that inflation's been higher than anticipated for a lot of different reasons. Do I believe that the Fed's going to lower interest rates by 50 basis points next month? No, I don't. You got to remember, as little as a week ago, we were hoping that we'd get 25 basis points, and then you had your jobless numbers come out. And your jobless numbers were weaker than anticipated because you had a massive amount of revisions. But those revisions, though, they were really 40% of the revisions were focused on state and local government in regards to on the education side. Do I think that we're going to be cut by 50 basis points in September? No, that's just a market indicator. I'd be lucky if we see 25 basis points by year end. But will that really make a difference? It's all psychological, but it's really not going to make that much of a difference. We can't risk having short-term interest rates drop dramatically because then your inflationary expectations would come unanchored because the inflation is still there. It's not coming out in the tariffs yet. We all believe that it will. But where you're seeing your inflation is still on the housing side, on owner's equivalent rent, which is basically what you could rent your house for if it was indeed rental. OER, the Federal Reserve missed that, for the last 3 years. It's been extremely strong, and it's, OER is not, deaccelerating as expected. A side part on that, every administration has been known to change their benchmarks, and the Biden administration did it on steroids. And the Biden administration thought that OER, or what you could rent your house for, was not going to increase by the amount that it did. So they changed a greater weighting on OER in your inflationary indices. Well, it came back to bite the Biden administration. That was a major reason why we had 8-9% inflation, 2-3 years ago. And a reason why the Fed had said that inflation was transitory is because they really believe that OER was not going to be as embedded as it really is.
So let me move the conversation to the current and future trends shaping the U.S. economy. How can global events like conflicts of geopolitical tension, what's going on in Russia, Ukraine, we know the president's meeting with Zelensky and Putin next week, what's going on in Israel and Gaza, impacting economic growth and trade?
If I had this answer, I would really be talking to you in my island, not my office. The geopolitical issues right now are the greatest levels that they've been in probably about 35 years or so. I will not say, ever. We're not exactly having that clock ticking in regards to how close we're going to a nuclear war. But I adamantly believe that the methods of global production has changed dramatically. It started really back in 2008. Then again in 2012, 2013, but went on steroids in 2020 when the West weaponized the flow of funds, when we froze Russia's assets and forced them into default on their debt. We have never done that before. And the East weaponized the flow of goods. It is these geopolitical tensions are there. We are in a once in a generation or once every other generation change. And how is this going to unfold? My son is in the military. My son is in the special forces. So I have a proverbial dog in this fight. But with that also said, is that how is this unfolding? We can't project weakness, but on the other hand, I'm adamantly against interjecting our power in areas that are not core interest to the United States.
How are technological advancements, like we talk a lot about AI and automation transforming industries and the labor market?
Well, the labor market is one of the things that we're really perplexed upon. The labor participation rate was, 65, 66% before the pandemic. The labor participation rate now is around 62.5%. Why are people not coming back in the labor market like they had? If we had the labor participation rate was out where it currently used to be, we would have about a 5.5% unemployment rate. Well, with artificial intelligence, that's really impacting my son's generation in regards to your entry-level production. I don't think that AI is going to be the end-all to be-all, but I do think it's going to change dramatically on your white-collar entry-level positions. And the more that the demand for more funds or more monies, the more AI is going to come along in order to mitigate the rising demand for increase in wages. I do believe AI is a factor, but it's not going to be an end-all to be-all.
So I want to come back to interest rates. In your opinion, what is the trajectory of inflation and interest rates, and what are their effects on consumer behavior and investment?
Inflation is a two-part phenomenon. It's too much money chasing too few goods, fearing higher prices tomorrow. We do have too much money in the system. It's because of quantitative easing, and right now the Fed is doing stealth quantitative easing. At the end of the last Treasury auction, it was revealed that I guess it's about 6 weeks ago, of the $25 billion Treasury auction, the Treasury bought about $15 billion worth of that auction in order so it won't fail or to get the yields down. The Fed's still doing that. We're still monetizing our debt. In regards to inflation, we don't want to lose inflationary expectations, because once you start fearing higher prices, people are going to go out and start hoarding their goods and stuff. We don't want to have unanchored inflationary expectations. then all of a sudden you're going to see a 7 or 8% on your, on your 30-year Treasury, which would be just disastrous with a $37 trillion deficit that we have.
Obviously, there's this debate on climate change, clean energy, zero EPA. Obviously, the Trump administration does definitely have a radical change from the previous administration. What are the long-term implications of climate change and clean energy initiatives on specific sectors and economic development?
I'm sure I'm going to get myself in trouble with some of your listeners, and I could always tell when I say something controversial because I get a gazillion and a half responses and stuff like that. And I've had some people say, hey, this guy's an idiot, he should be fired and stuff like that. Is climate change, I do believe we could affect the regional ecology. I look at the Chesapeake Bay. When I grew up in New Jersey, and the Delaware River used to always get on fire and stuff like that. It was like a daily event. A couple of years ago, I ran a triathlon up in New Jersey, and where we swam was in the Delaware River, where it used to catch fire all the time. Well, we've cleaned it up and stuff like that. The water was good. No one's got any sort of really bad infections. I guess the question is, are we vain enough to really say that we could affect the global ecology or the global climate? Are we really acting? Are we really God? Can we really do that? I don't know how to answer that. I don't know if I believe in it, and I don't know if I don't believe in it. But I do believe that we can affect your regional ecology. Look at Mount St. Helens. We weren't supposed to go back to Mount St. Helens for 400 years. You go to the Chernobyl over in Russia. The ecology that is there with the worst nuclear disaster ever, there's things that we don't understand. Yeah, do I believe that climate change is there? Climate is always changing, but am I vain enough to say that man is really doing it? It's all based upon on a theory, on a hypothesis. Several years ago, I was at a wedding. I met this fantastic guy. He was getting a doctorate in both in theology and astrophysics. And it's like, whoa, this is completely off the charts. And he goes, no, both are based on a theory, based on a thesis. Astrophysics is a thesis or a theory. You accept or reject no hypothesis. Religion, do you believe it or you don't believe it? It's, in regards to a lot of studies, and I can't speak really declaratively on all the studies and the like, but can man really affect the global ecology? I really don't know how to answer that question.
I think that's the question that everybody's trying to answer. We really appreciate your joining us on this Saturday edition of the show, and we look forward to having you back. Much more on the Armstrong-Williams Show when we return.
Hey, thank you, Armstrong.
Thank you. Welcome back to the broadcast. Let me welcome Hayden Padgett, President of the National Young Republicans. I think it's your first time on the show, am I correct?
You are correct.
Oh, good. And Steve Laffey,
hey,
who's a regular. So let me start with you, Hayden. I guess I did not realize on a military base, of all places, soldiers cannot carry their firearms. And then what happened in Georgia on our military base, where 5 people were shot because of a disgruntled employee. And you think about it, Hayden, you had the massacre in New York, the person that drove from Las Vegas. It seems that there may be different variations of it, and they want to attribute this to mental health. And then you had another assassination attempt that nobody's talked about on Trump's life in Florida, where they found all these explosives at the Palm Beach airport in a manifesto plans of killing the president. I asked you this question, and it seems to happen more often than we can keep count of. What is happening to America?
That is the question. I think if we knew the answer to that, we wouldn't be having all these debates around how do you solve the problem. The obvious answer is there's a mental health problem with the folks who are doing this, but what's causing that, I think, is the big issue. I think the biggest issue at root is, as a country, we're pulling apart from each other. Even back in the 70s, they were writing about how people weren't spending enough time with friends. They weren't spending enough time socializing, getting out in their communities, building relationships so that people, you have a reason to be more social and to treat people with dignity and respect. People aren't going to church as often. And it's been 50 years since that first phenomenon was talked about as a crisis, and it's only gotten worse. People even in my generation, they spend time indoors on social media or on Netflix. They're not spending as much time making new friends and new relationships. And when that happens, you become vulnerable to the kind of craziness and wild opinions, or even just fake bots saying crazy stuff online that makes you do awful things or make you believe the worst kinds of things about our fellow humans. I think at root, that's the problem. We got to find a way to come back together as a community and build more relationships together and spend more time together as people.
Let me just stay with you a moment, because you're president of the National Young Republicans. We just read a report where the Republican base, only 10 years ago, 67% identified themselves as proud Americans. Do you know that today only 37% are proud to be Americans and see shame in wearing the label of an American? Do you also know that many in the Democratic base feel that their members in Congress don't go farther enough in taking on Trump? And they see this guy in New York, Mamdani, as the future of the party? I ask you this question. People are always talking about what's wrong with Trump and conservatives in the GOP, but what has happened to the Democratic Party, Hayden?
There's the old saying that if you're young and you're not liberal, you don't have a heart, and if you're old and you're not conservative, you don't have a brain. I think that's funny, but also not that accurate. But the sentiment is young people have always believed really radical, crazy things. And that's always been why we exist in the Young Republicans, to help our peers, our friends, our family to see the light, see the truth about policies and the way things actually work and what will actually make things better, bring them into the party and have them support the Republican candidates. What a lot of young people are starting to see right now, you're actually seeing a pretty large shift of people my age, particularly those who were younger, to the president. 2024 was a surprisingly, shockingly good year for Republicans among young people. But at the same time, that radicalism still exists on the left. A lot of our peers are still very radically progressive, and they believe a lot of really weird things. I think that only got worse during COVID. I put a lot of root in the fact that a lot of these Democrat states shut their people inside. They didn't let them go to school. They didn't let them actually have a real education or get out and just meet people. And so when they came into college, this is 5 years on from COVID, those are the same people who have these absolutely bonkers ideas and think all these crazy politicians like Mamdani are the right answer because they don't know any better. And they didn't really have the kind of education they should have. I'm just thankful that there are so many in that demographic who are actually shifting towards the president and towards Republicans. It gives me hope that we're going to be fine in a few years.
Steve Laffey, I know you're observing closely what's going on in Texas with the governor appealing to the Supreme Court to force the Democrats to come back so they can have a quorum, even if it means arresting them. And I know You've dealt with public leadership and the companies that you've run throughout your life. This is an interesting moment in America in terms of our image here and abroad. And now Governor Newsom saying we're going to do the same in California where we are the majority. Your thoughts? Is Governor Abbott correct?
Texas, what happened is happening in Texas, and what happened in Illinois several years ago is as embarrassing as it gets when state legislatures of either party flee the state because they don't want to have a vote, means that democracy is losing. But the real problem, Hayden hit on a lot of really good points, is that this doesn't seem to be getting through to as many people as in the Democratic Party, that they're still losing. I mean, I'm a Republican, don't get me wrong, but there are many ways to get back into the game for Democrats. They seem to want to take none of the routes to get back union voters, to get back some of the younger people that are turning Republican. They don't want any of it back. They are into an ideology and they can't stop it. They can't stop it. And it's summed up by what's happening in Texas right now. Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, seems to be making no inroads of going down the middle to become the Democratic presidential nominee. He's going to move to the left every single day, it looks like. Meanwhile, the country is celebrating what President Trump is doing with energy, for example, and that when no one has to obey the mandates of California in their own state to make a car. So GM and Ford, why political companies are going back to making some F-250s and Ford Expeditions. So good for them.
Let me stay with you. My city, Washington, D.C., which I love, a former DOJ staffer, 19 years old, was realizing that his girlfriend's car was being hijacked by a mob of teenagers. And it has ignited something with the president, who continues to say maybe we need to take over the District of Columbia. And what a lot of people don't understand is that the mayor of Washington, D.C., Muriel Bowser, that I'm very proud of, because she's very strong on crime and education, and she has formed a very strong collaboration with the president. But the issue is whether they should lower the age of trying these kids as adults to the age of 14, because D.C., like many cities across the country, continues to face these rising crime rates. We're facing a public safety crisis, and how are cities responding? Many people feel the cities are failing to respond, and Trump has frequently used crime as a campaign issue that he's focused on. Is that still resonating in 2025, especially with younger of these suburban voters? What do we need to do? I'm going to ask this of you, Steve, and of Hayden.
Yeah. Well, I would just say it is resonating. Crime and safety for the average American, whether in Oregon, where they legalized all these drugs, or Washington, and they saw the crime rate go up and they had to go backwards on that. People want to be safe. So President Trump is right to go after these issues now. You asked a specific question about 14-year-olds being tried as adults. To even ask the question is like saying, do we need more security with people with guns in public schools? What you're saying is that we've totally failed. If we have to try 14-year-old, they've done something at 14, murdered somebody, raped somebody, that they need to be tried as an adult, which I mostly would disagree with, except in extreme circumstance, means we as a society has failed. And number one, churches have failed, and our education system in the public schools has totally failed to have anything like that even being discussed. We have a long way to go, Armstrong.
Let me ask you a different question, Hayden. It is so encouraging that President Trump, despite all the rhetoric between he and Putin and sending submarines, next week, the president at an undisclosed location will convene a meeting between Putin and Zelensky, which has been confirmed by the Kremlin. This could only mean that they have a plan in place to finally end and conclude this war in Ukraine. How the land will be divided up, what both agreed to, that's a different story. But don't you find this to be encouraging?
Of course. Yeah, the war out there, just like the war in Gaza, is awful and tragic, and so many people have lost their lives needlessly because of Putin trying to take land that's not his. And I am glad the president has had such a firm commitment to trying to restore peace to save lives. I think that he's to be commended for trying to do so early and trying to have a bring both sides of the table honestly. I think what he also learned, though, is that Putin wasn't willing to come to the table at the start of his administration. And what President Trump needed to do was be a lot stronger and make it really clear to Putin that if he does not, there will be consequences. We will ensure peace a different way, which is why you had the submarines deployed. I suspect that and other very strong actions by the president is why Putin is willing to talk now. My only hope is that he understands finally that the president means it and that he takes these negotiations more seriously than he did the earlier versions that the president initiated back in the spring.
Finally, I'm gonna ask this question of you, Hayden, because it's your first time on the platform. You know, squad member Delia Ramirez proudly declared this past week, in Spanish no less, that she's proud to be a Guatemalan before an American. What does that tell you? She's a member of Congress. What kind of example is this?
No example. A couple weeks ago, there was a state house member in Maine who was talking about how she's proud to be Somali and actually they need to do things to help Somalia and prioritize them. And look, if you come to this country legally, that's fantastic. And a lot of our best contributors are immigrants. Look at Elon Musk as a good example of that. But those people who are doing so great and are contributing in such wonderful ways do so because they embrace America and they treat this as their home. This becomes where they are from. And for people who purport to be leaders and want to say they're going to make America better, but say things like this, even if they're just trying to pander to some base, even if that's the case, but I think it's really more than that, they should really be, we should think differently about whether they should be in leadership. I mean, you declare an oath to defend this country and this country only. And we need to hold our leaders to a higher standard.
Well, listen, I want to thank you for joining us, Hayden. And, you know, Steve, it's always a pleasure to see you. You know, Aaron has convinced me to talk about what's in a smile. We've got this person on who's a pediatric dentist, and we're going to talk about what your teeth and your smile and what it tells you. I'm excited to find out when we come back after these messages. We'll be back after this short commercial break. Don't go away.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence, there's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion. And that is, there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. So as we were going out to break, I was talking about what Aaron convinced me to do today. So my sister Mary is in the studio with me, and she says, oh, listen, this is a very important topic because oral cancer, you look under the tongue and the doctor can tell whether you have oral cancer. It can tell a lot about what's going on in the body. And she said teeth are very important. She said the only problem is that when you see people running around here toothless and don't have teeth, it's because it's so expensive they cannot afford it. And I said, oh, well, this may be an important topic. So our next guest says, Your mouth isn't just for talking, it's talking to you. Dr. Cameron McCoss, a leading pediatric dentist and author of If Your Mouth Could Talk, believes the mouth is the gateway to your entire body, from early signs of heart disease to stress, showing up as chipped teeth in kids. And he's here to share how your oral health, which my sister mentioned to me, could be revealing far more than you realize. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So you say the mouth is the gateway to overall health. Walk us through how that works.
Yes, of course. And by the way, this is nothing new. For thousands of years in the old Egyptians and Greeks and Persians, they always knew that the mouth was the window to the body. It was the gateway to the body. It's the opening to the body. But unfortunately, because dental schools and medical schools have always been separate, and by the way, this is not because a think tank got together and thought this was a great idea. It was more of a personality clash between the first two dentists who wanted to create the first dental school on the East Coast inside the Maryland School of Medicine. And so once the dental schools were established separately, then dentists started learning about how to become mechanics, to fill teeth and to clean teeth and put braces on, et cetera. And then physicians said, well, this is the job of the dentist to worry about the mouth. And then so they kind of forgot that the mouth is connected to the body. It's filled with billions of microbes. Whatever happens in the mouth affects the body and vice versa. And so about in the early 20th century or late 19th century, this came back and started in Europe, and then it started extended in the United States, that physicians, it went to the other extreme. They basically started blaming everything from syphilis to stupidity, which was back then actually a medical diagnosis, to oral health. So it went to that extreme. And then they started extracting everybody's teeth in the early 20th century. My own grandmother had all of her teeth extracted during her 20s, unfortunately, because of a digestion problem. And then it went to the other extreme in the mid 20th century of we neglecting the mouth as a source of diseases. And now it's finally coming back with scientific evidence.
Well, tell us in the interest of time, what are some of the early signs in the mouth that could indicate serious non-dental conditions elsewhere in the body?
Yeah, I mean, you could diagnose early cancer, many types of cancer. You can have sores in the mouth. You can have gum inflammation, the growth of the tissues in the mouth, like the gum tissues, the bones, maybe the bite is starting to feel off. As an adult, obviously your jaws are not supposed to change. So that could be many types of cancer. HIV could have these sores in the mouth that are very indicative of particular immune deficiencies. You could have, everything from, bulimia, many eating disorders, diabetes, because people with diabetes can have easier way of getting infections, and the mouth is a big source of infection because it's filled with tens of billions of microbes. So there's just so many oral diseases that they have oral manifestations. Many medications can have oral manifestations. And also it's the other way around. We can look in the mouth. You've probably seen in movies, even in the old movies, when they would want to know if somebody's healthy, the first thing they would look at in their mouth, and if their mouth was healthy, at least there was a high risk chance that they were healthy.
Let me have you address this. I know you heard this story about the man who almost died several times after having a tooth removed, and he's calling for a change to medical guidance. What do you say to that?
Yeah, in fact, a few years ago, unfortunately, a child died of a simple tooth infection that would have cost $80 to fix it, and it was left untreated. It created a much more massive infection. It finally got into the brain, and by the time they had to do surgery on him, they couldn't survive. The cost of surgery was $250,000, but that aside, that child unfortunately died. So because the mouth is so near our airways, around our brain, so I want everybody to think of the mouth more than just teeth. It's really the airway is part of the mouth. The nasal bones are part of the mouth. The tongue, how we swallow, taste, talking. So that's why the title of my book is If Your Mouth Could Talk, because if it could talk to you, it would tell you your mouth is more than just shiny teeth, and we really need to take care of it as a cohesive and a comprehensive solution to our medical care.
As kids return to school, what should families prioritize when it comes to oral care routines? And what role does stress play in damaging oral health, if it does, and also how it is showing up in young patients?
Yeah, well, let me address the stress part because it's related to the previous discussion. So stress, it's probably the number one killer, right? Because it causes all these other things in our lives. But a sign of it in the mouth is when we stress, some of us take it out on our heads, we get headaches, sometimes we get a stomachache. But in the mouth, we start grinding our teeth and it starts wearing our teeth. We start cracking our teeth. We start damaging our teeth. So that's one of the signs. As to your question regarding kids, yes, one of the things that I'm an orthodontist, my wife is a pediatric dentist, and sometimes when parents say, oh, Dr. Haas, isn't that just a baby tooth? I always have to educate the parents that to that child, a baby tooth is just as critical as our permanent teeth are to adults. But oral dental problems in kids have significant impact on their airway, on their sleep, on their confidence when they go to school. Kids with dental problems are 3 times more likely to miss school and 4 times more likely to get below average GPA. As the kids get older, impacts, obviously, the seeds that are planted early on can turn into anxiety and depression. As they get older, it impacts their dating life. It's linked to all these chronic diseases that we spoke about. It impacts their personal and professional successes. And then it impacts longevity because of all those things. So as a parent, it's really critical that we take care of our kids' oral health at home every single day with the right oral care products that are safe and effective. So we need to educate ourselves and also take them to the dentist routinely so they can diagnose things as they arise.
Tell us about the super mouth system and how does it differ from traditional oral care products?
Great question. So as you may know, the number one disease in the world, according to the World Health Organization, and the most common chronic disease of kids in the United States is dental disease, cavities and gum disease, which is absolutely absurd because I remember when I was in dental school 30 years ago, we only discussed fluoride versus non-fluoride, and we're still discussing the same thing, as if that one ingredient is going to either save everything or going to kill everything. So our company, Supermouth, we actually customize oral care products based on age and risk factors. So we have very unique and customized, incredibly safe and effective toothpaste, mouthwash, toothbrush, tongue scrapers, flosses, accessories to make oral care fun for babies. We have teething products. Then we have the baby teeth era, which is age 2 to 5. And then when they're going to the transition, which we call mixed dentition between 6 to 12. And then of course, teens and adults, we have unique products for orthodontics, unique products for pregnancy. So what's different about Supermouth is that we customize oral care products for unique stages of development that are truly safe and effective.
It's interesting because, I have, ever since, and I think it has to do with our parents, I've always gone to the dentist. I've only had one cavity.
Wow.
And I've never had any of my teeth removed. And I'm over 50.
Good for you.
So, yeah, leave it at that. What's one simple, often overlooked habit viewers can start today that would have the biggest long-term impact on their oral health?
Yeah, I think the biggest advice I can give to the public is stop arguing over fluoride, is one ingredient. Just like we learn about, it's like non-fluoride. If I go to a restaurant and say, I want a non-chicken with a side of non-broccoli, I think that would be, my waiter would be a little confused. So we need to just, as adults, as parents, just like we learn what the nutrients are in various foods, we also need to learn about various oral care products or trust at least one brand that gives you all the education and the content and oral care products that are truly safe and truly effective for various ages and stages and risk factors.
Are enough people going to their dentist?
No, as you may know, after public speaking, going to the dentist is the second biggest fear. And I can understand because in the old days, nobody likes to get an injection in their mouth, getting a tooth drilled on or pulled, worst case scenario.
But you should talk about it. One of the reasons I do go to the dentist periodically, and I think people should understand this, I don't care how much you think you're brushing and cleaning your teeth, and you're using the little things that extract all the stuff out of it, you need to go to your dental on a regular basis to have your teeth cleaned and have your mouth examined. That's important.
100%. And it's not just for filling cavities and cleaning your teeth. Of course, like we discussed earlier, because dentists, hygienists, we're trained to see a lot more about your life, about your overall health. and of course about your oral health. And so we're healthcare professionals. We want to prevent disease, not just to fill cavities when you do have a cavity. And we prevent disease by teaching you how to have the right oral care at home, how to have the right diet, the pH of the mouth, saliva, sleeping, mouth breathing, all the oral habits. There's just so many things. But again, it's really important to be your dentist, but the dentist is 2 days out of the year. So what happens at home the other 363 days are really, really critical as well. So I encourage parents and adults to learn about hydroxyapatite ingredients and prebiotics that promote healthy oral microbes, not just decimating the oral microbiome as a lot of the oral care products do today. And so we can all work together and address the #1 disease in the world, because it's linked to so many other health issues and mental health issues, physical health issues. So together we can really address this very easily, because oral diseases, which is the #1 disease in the world, is almost entirely preventable.
Listen, my man, this has been such an important discussion. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, when we come back, I know many people have been curious as to why so many airplanes and helicopters and small aircrafts are crashing in the skies. Well, Jerald Fritz, our man, is joining us in the next segment to talk about what they're not telling you. And this is something like this segment you need to pay attention to. We'll be back with that. Don't go away. Aviation safety.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
What if one cyber attack could shut down your bank, ground every plane, stop your GPS, and paralyze our power grid, all in one blow? Our next guest, Jerald Fritz, says it's not science fiction, it's a looming crisis hiding in plain sight. Jerry, tell us more.
Well, thanks for having me, Armstrong. Yeah, that's a potential crisis in the air. That's 12,500 miles above the Earth's equator. Look, the GPS system in America is the backbone of our economy. If something happens to those satellites that are traveling above us, we would lose instantly our banking system, our electronic grid, the logistics, healthcare, emergency services, agriculture, transportation, safety of airplanes. Everything would collapse instantly. So within a week, our entire economy would be catastrophically decimated, and we have a single point of failure: these satellites above us. There is no terrestrial backup. There's no plan B, if you will. The Russians have one. The Chinese have one. The United States doesn't have one.
Why?
So
why is it we don't have one?
Well, we used to, sort of. We had something called LORAN. It was developed after World War II. It set out sort of precise timing elements for our economy. But back in after the war, certainly in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, it needed to be replaced. George W. Bush recommended that it be replaced. No funding came to do that. And then when Obama became president, they thought, well, we're a satellite-only system, and so we're just not going to fund a terrestrial backup. But it's critical. And now that you see that the former head of the Intelligence Committee said that the Russians and the Chinese are developing nuclear weapons in space that would take out our satellites, where would we be? They have a terrestrial backup, we don't. So it became critical under President Trump's first administration. They decided this was a good idea. Nothing came about. It was stalled, and now we're back again. The Department of Transportation and the Defense Department are actively looking for a terrestrial backup. And the good news is there is an existing infrastructure that will accomplish this purpose. We have about 1,800 television stations, regular old television stations, all around the United States that can provide this type of timing element that can be used to triangulate positioning and provide this timing. Fortunately, under the first Trump administration, the Federal Communications Commission approved a new standard for broadcasters to use, which is a digital standard that is called Next-Gen Broadcast, or some people refer to it as so-called ATSC3, which is the sort of more a scientific name. But this new standard allows broadcasters to use their channel, that big chunk of frequency that broadcasters get, to transmit digital information. And part of that digital information can be this GPS backup. So we are excited, the broadcasting industry is excited to participate this. We're demonstrating it now to the Department of Transportation and the Defense Department, to the administration. We need somebody to goose that. We need the president to step up. Hey, I can save the United States economy. I can protect the United States economy by fast tracking this GPS, terrestrial GPS backup, and I think he can encourage the Federal Communications Commission to move forward to get all broadcasters to adopt this new standard and activate this backup plan.
So what kind of attacks or failures are most likely to disrupt GPS cyber, Jerald? Kinetic, jamming, and can you also explain what you touched on, how this next-gen TV broadcasting could act as a GPS backup, and how would it work in practice? And I want to say, for full disclosure, Jerald Fritz once worked for Sinclair Broadcast Company, but he has since retired. So for full disclosure, go ahead, Jerald.
Well, thanks. Look, today in the Ukrainian-Russian conflict, and in the Middle East, the jammers and what are called the spoofers are affecting the GPS system. So today, you asked what's the most critical aspect. I think it's defense. We have hotspots all over the world, and if people are going to be using on the battlefield jammers and spoofers to hurt our defense efforts, that's a real problem. And the president's talking about the Golden Dome. This is something that would exist underneath the Golden Dome in case something happens to those satellites, to make sure that our terrestrial economy still works with a backup for GPS. So I think defense is the most critical aspect. But there are so many other features of our economy. The banking system. If you try to use your ATM, it wouldn't work anymore. If you tried to use the electric grid, wouldn't work anymore. If you tried to use the transportation system, wouldn't work anymore. So consequently, there is a whole raft of economic factors that would be just, as I say, decimated. The estimates are $1 billion per day effect on the United States economy. $1 billion per day. So why we need this backup? We need this backup in case something happens to the satellites. We can continue to have that timing. How do those little bits, how do those little timing bits get to the electric grid, get to the transportation grid, get to the communications grid? How does that happen? Well, we have this channel that's broadcast over the air for free to everybody, right? We can have 3 or 4 antennas, great big towers in a particular market. They can each be broadcasting these timing bits, help to triangulate, and we know where things are, and we can help to triangulate and to send that data bit, the teeny tiny little data bit that will activate the timing for all of this critical infrastructure.
You know, if there's one message you like to leave policymakers with and the public, what is it?
That the existing broadcast infrastructure has now matured in a digital form to do so much more than just broadcast television programming. We can do data distribution, the likes of which we haven't seen, in a much more efficient way, a much cheaper way. But the most important piece of the public interest is protecting our country. And by using the existing infrastructure that we don't have to build, we don't have to pay for, it already exists. There are 1,800 television stations, both commercial and non-commercial stations out there today that can easily update their infrastructure, their equipment to broadcast in this new standard, this new next-gen broadcast standard, and provide this protection, what's more in the public interest than protecting the country, right? This is the message that I would like to leave, and I think the president would like to leave with the folks at the Department of Transportation and certainly at the Federal Communications Commission.
Jerald, Fritz, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us for today's broadcast. I also want to thank our earlier guests, Ken Engel, Hayden, Padgett, Steve Laffey, Dr. Cameron Hawes. Let me just say, I don't always get a chance to thank you enough for watching us on weekends and all kinds of hours. You have so many other things that you have the choice to do, read newspapers, watch other programming, but you choose to watch us. We appreciate the letters. We appreciate the feedback on the street. We appreciate WJLA 24/7, Greg Massani, Aaron Brock, Aiden King, Cam Schofield, who handles the prompter for us, and all the great people that work here at WJLA 24/7. The Bible says if you find something good in somebody, praise it. We always praise the guests, but we sometimes forget about the great team that makes it all possible. So I'm glad I had enough time today to say thank you, A-Team. So long from this edition of the Armstrong Williams Show. Thank you.